the stifling of information is just, I mean, honestly, I don't use this word very often, but it's scary. It's pretty frightening to see in our country the kinds of, the kinds of censorship that's going on.
Oh yeah, it's like World War II-esque, or it could be.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean,
don't do it about it.
I used to think you just saw that in like totalitarian governments,
Yeah, you can see the little start of it, can't you? The little beginnings of how this all works. It is really scary.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. One second.
Okay.
I'm going to hear two voices at once for a second here. So
okay. Sounds good.
There. Okay. Now I got to go back to Zoom.
How long you been doing this, Dan, this podcast?
I just started this actually during the back in March. I had an intern, a marketing intern, and he wanted to do a podcast for like the last year. And then I didn't want to do it because I thought it would be too much work. And so now you can see live on YouTube. I thought it would be too much work and that I wouldn't like it. But then I started doing it, and it was right at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was really nice to be able to talk to like fellow intellectuals and people that I couldn't face to face anyways.
Right.
And so I actually really enjoy it. So
that's great. That's really awesome that you're doing that, because we need outlets right now for continuing education or just general information, professional, business, marketing, scientific, whatever the case might be, without being able to meet in person and going to seminars and all that kind of thing. It's more important than ever. Totally.
Seminars are a good place to meet people. I found out to be on the podcast, but all the seminars got canceled. One moment, one more thing. Sorry, there's just technical at the beginning here. All right. I just got done with my last patient here like 30 minutes ago, so I'm always like speeding to get on the call and get everything set up.
So you're in your office?
Yeah, I'm in my office right now.
Okay, great. You got your studio set up there, huh?
Yeah, it's my lobby actually.
Great. Awesome.
So
you're in North Dakota, right?
Yep, North Dakota, West Fargo, North Dakota. And you're
Scottsdale, Arizona.
Okay, I was looking at your website and I saw some stuff that looked like Hawaii. Like there's something that said Kauai. Like you had your
we were planning on doing a health and wellness retreat. Oh, I'm sorry, you froze up there a little bit. What'd you say? You froze for a second.
Oh, I was listening to you.
Yeah, I was putting together a health and wellness retreat for National Hockey League players, former players, and their wives and families for this past summer in Kauai, and then COVID hit, and of course everything changed.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, now I just gotta paste. All right, there we go. So this live part is like the unedited version, and then we'll edit it and I'll send you the video in like 3 to 4 weeks.
Oh, okay.
And then for people that are interested in like marketing things like on their Facebook and stuff like that, I do some coaching, but I don't know if that's what you'd like to do or not, but you can always talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about it definitely. I've we can talk about this when we talk, but I've everything I've done so far with my projects and everything is really, I've done gratis. The ebook has been downloaded and shared over 100,000 times, and I haven't collected a penny from it. Now I have gotten a few small donations, but I just made the decision this week to start charging something for it. So I'm going to be charging $6.95, just a nominal fee, because this has kind of become my life between doing my monthly newsletter now about COVID and keeping up with all the information and connecting with Children's Health Defense and all the other different people who are involved with this vaccine risk awareness movement. I'm very involved with that. And so I spend probably 30 hours a week working on all these different things. And I'm just starting to try to figure out ways where I can monetize it a little bit so that I can, keep from having to get a 40-hour week job.
Yeah.
I'm on a disability. I wrecked my back between weightlifting and practice. And so I had to sell my practice and everything. So, I've been out without an income that way. So my wife is kind of like, okay, it's been 2.5 years of developing, researching, writing this ebook. And then now another, 1.5, 2 years almost of trying to promote it and trying to, speak and doing all these different things. So that's why I finally decided to put a little bit of a monetary amount on the ebook and just to see. I'm also writing a book on vaccines and pregnancy and vaccines in childhood. And so those should be out, hopefully by the first of the year. And those will be on Amazon, available on Amazon.
To vaccinate or not to vaccinate, that's the second book?
Yeah, I haven't decided on a title. That was kind of a working title potentially, but the first book is going to be more related to like I said, vaccinations during pregnancy and the implications for the fetus and potential problems from those vaccines. And then the other one would be vaccines in childhood. So I'm going to kind of separate them.
And let's hit on all of that stuff here tonight.
Okay, that sounds great. Yeah.
So the name of the 1200 study book, I'm trying to find the exact name.
Yeah, 1200 Studies, Truth Will Prevail.
1200 Studies, Truth Will Prevail.
And it now has about a little over 1,400 studies, excerpts from 1,400 studies and summaries and things like that with links to the studies.
Yeah, that's what you had said. That's why I put 1,400.
Oh, yeah. Well, it said 1,400 vaccines. So I thought, well, maybe someone looking at that might say, well, I don't want to learn about 1,400 vaccines.
Yeah.
I'm not a vaccine advocate, and I don't. So
that's true. I didn't think.
But okay. Wait, real quick before we start, are your listeners mostly public or chiropractors?
They're both.
Or would you say it's a mix? Okay.
It's more public than chiropractors, but
public
to like all kind, like it goes out to everywhere. Like
okay,
that speaks English.
Yeah, with YouTube, especially if it's on YouTube, yeah, they have access. I was just curious because if it was a purely chiropractic audience, then I would have, tailored my comments a little bit more scientifically or specifically for that. And I'll try to, tailor it. I'll kind of be in the middle ground there a little bit and not get too.
That's what I would do because there's a lot of chiropractors also that are on the show and that mostly chiropractors. And then there's just the regular audience also. I would say it's more audience of doctors. It's hard to track actually.
I was going to say, what is your live audience numbers usually? And then do you know how many people tend to go view your videos approximately, or do you have a feel for that? Or
I don't I would say, in the thousands. That's like, I can just estimate it to that.
Wow. That's awesome.
But it's really hard for I haven't found out an exact way to get an exact number. Like there's YouTube downloads, but that's not where most people listen to it because we're on we put the podcast on iTunes and Spotify.
I saw that.
All these different Stitcher and iHeartRadio. And so people can come across it in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say.
Okay.
They can always go back to it. If they find one episode, this is what I do when I listen to podcasts. I find an interesting podcast, then I listen to one episode and I go back and listen to other ones. So, because they're
Okay.
on YouTube or Spotify or something like that.
Yep. Sure. You bet.
All right. So I'm going to introduce you, and then we can do. You can. I'm just going to introduce. You have like so much stuff here in your CV, but I'm going to introduce you as you. And
Did I send you the short version, like the short little for vaccine talks version? It was like a
no,
one pager, but only a couple paragraphs. I thought I had sent you that. If not, I can just kind of summarize things for you. That's totally fine.
Yeah, I'm going to introduce you, and then the book, the 1200 Studies Truth Will Prevail book, and then I'm going to let you take it from there. How about that?
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. Here we go. All right. Hello, this is Dr. Daniel Pazarski with Dr. Dan's Health and Business Power Hour, coming to you from West Fargo, North Dakota, in the office of Balance Chiropractic. I'm here today with Dr. Alan Palmer, and he is the author of the book 1200 Studies, Truth Will Prevail. It is about 1200 studies that he's put together, as excerpts from that he's put together about vaccines. And what better time is it to talk about vaccines when we are we're in the corona pandemic and on the verge of possibly being forced to take vaccines in various different ways. Thank you for being here, Dr. Palmer.
My pleasure.
I will let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about yourself and your history.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for having me, Doc. Appreciate it. So I'm a chiropractor by trade. I've been in practice about 35 years. Actually, I'm not in practice anymore, but was in practice for a little over about 30 years and sold my practice. And so it goes way back. The thing about the vaccines goes way back for me. I have always been interested in vaccine science. And so as a chiropractor, and this is something that I still stick to or hold to, is I never tell people whether they should vaccinate or not, or whether they should have their children vaccinated or not. When I was a chiropractor, I had books. I had a lending library of all kinds of books that address the issue. I had a studies file of studies and different things there. Doc, you got the same, I'm sure. Oh. So I would lend patients books, and they could check them out and different studies, and I would tell them, go to your pediatrician, your child's pediatrician, and ask them to do the same. Provide you with the evidence about the safety and the effectiveness of the vaccines, and then study both sides of the issue and make an educated decision. And I still tell people that. And so fast forward, after I had my injury, my back injury, and ended up having to sell my practice and everything, I'd always wanted to make a difference.
You were a bodybuilder, and that's how you had the injury?
Well, this is how I found chiropractic, actually. When I was 19, I was squatting in a power rack, with the pins and everything, doing some heavy squats with 550 pounds, and my back went out. And so I was just probably close to 19, maybe still 18. And so I couldn't walk. It was real severe. I went to some different doctors, got some different advice. They felt that I had herniated at least one of my discs. And at some point, I wasn't getting better, and I just was frustrated because I had tried rest, I had tried pain pills. When they started talking about back surgery, I said, I've got to find a different avenue for this, because I'm, here I am, like barely 18 and a half or 19 years old, and I'm not ready to have my back cut on. So I went to a chiropractor, and I was actually introduced to this gentleman. He was the chiropractor for the Minnesota Vikings back there. I'm from Minnesota, and the Minnesota North Stars. But he didn't go to the team. The players would come to him.
Is that Dr. Park?
It was Dr. Zins, actually, back then, Brian Zins. Yep, okay. In St. Louis Park. And so he's passed away now, but amazing guy. And at the time, I was thinking about going into some form of sports medicine. And I was like, well, these other doctors weren't able to help me. I'm going to give this a try. So I went to him, and just to make a long story short, he identified some structural and physical components of my body that no one else did. As an example, at the time, whenever I would squat, I'd have to wrap my knees in some big, heavy wraps. Otherwise, my knees would just start killing me, really hurting from doing heavy squats. He looked at my feet and found out that I pronated, my ankles rolled in, and I had flat feet. So he got me into orthotics. And I'm like, well, this makes sense, right? This makes sense. And he started adjusting me and doing what chiropractors do. And I got better so fast, I was just, whoa, this is what I want to do. And interestingly, when I went back to heavy weightlifting after getting adjusted and worked on, I never had to use those wraps again, ever on my knees. So that was kind of,
knees were just rubbing together.
Stress on there from having my ankles rolling, rotating my lower legs, the old kinetic chain, the knee, ankle bone's connected to the knee bone and all the way up the body. And there's this chain reaction that occurs up the body from the ground. And so that was how I got interested in chiropractic. So I had that injury early on, and then our job is very demanding. I'm not sure, some people, especially if they haven't been to a chiropractor, may not be aware of that. But when you're leaning over a table in awkward positions and twisting and bending and reaching and extending your upper body over your lower body in awkward ways, eventually it caused so much wear and tear in my discs that, they failed in my lower back. So chiropractic right now is the only thing that really keeps me going, but I have a pretty decent ability to do things I enjoy. I can go to the gym and, push weight on machines and pull weight. I never load my spine, and I just don't do things that aggravate it. But so anyway, when I had to sell my practice, I was really wanting to make a difference on a larger scale. I mean, I was always trying to figure out what could I do that would really make a difference for people's lives and in more than I can do in the four walls of my office. And so one of the things I started towards the end of my practice years was the Professional Baseball Chiropractic Society. So all of the chiropractors in Major League Baseball and minor league baseball, because I worked with the Arizona Diamondbacks here and still do, they're part of our organization. And then 2-3 years ago, I started the Professional Hockey Chiropractic Society. So we have the National Hockey League and American Hockey League DCs that are part of that as part of our organization. And so that was really fun for me to put those groups, those organizations together. But I really, I started noticing in the media and even social media from even some of my relatives that they were sharing information that was really negative about parents that don't vaccinate their children, very condescending, very denigrating. And I was like, okay, I need to write a social media post and put some of the science in here to try to explain to them that there is scientific reason for concern about the safety and effectiveness of vaccines. Then Jimmy Kimmel did a bit on his show where he did a monologue that just tore apart parents who didn't vaccinate their kids. And he had some doctors in the back of his studio set up with all their cameras and lights. And they interviewed these doctors, and the doctors basically were basically just in the face of the camera, just pointing their finger and dropping F-bombs they had to bleep out. If you think you're effing smarter than me, I went to medical school for 8 years, go get your kids vaccinated and all this stuff on his show. And I just said, okay, it's game on. All right, this is ridiculous what we're seeing from these people. So anyway, I started creating a larger document, and I thought it was going to be a long article. But as I continued to build it, and I went on PubMed, which is our government's, it's the world's largest database of medical and scientific information. It's accessible to all the public. Anyone can go on there. And I started researching things on the vaccines. It was like trying to drink water out of a fire hose, Doc. I mean, studies were coming at me left and right, in addition to the hundreds of studies I had then, a couple 200-300 studies. And I would go down these rabbit trails and find all of these other studies. And these are from mainstream journals. These are from peer-reviewed journals from all over the world. And so it just kept building and building and building. And eventually, kind of like you alluded to, it's an ebook. that now currently has over 1,400 studies that contradict what we're told about the safety and effectiveness of vaccines. Talks about the conflicts of interest and the bias in the research and the conflicts of interest between our health agencies like the FDA and CDC and pharma, where people from pharma get important positions within our health agencies, and then they help to run those health agencies, and then they go back into pharma in very lucrative positions. And so there's this revolving door, kind of an incestuous relationship between our health agencies and the pharmaceutical industry. So so that was the project, and I wanted to create something that was, it's really never designed, it's not, I never meant it to be designed to be read cover to cover. You would get really bored probably trying to read it cover to cover. But what I did is
and I'm like, is this going to be like all like scientific data, or is he like parsed it out? Yep. So how do people like access the information that they're like looking for? Do you have it broken up in a specific way?
Yeah, great question, Dan. So one thing that is really unique about this, and I really believe it's the most comprehensive expose on this topic ever created, but what I did was I broke it down into sections, and then each subject under each section, I created a link or a title in the table of contents. So it can be read best on a computer rather than an iPhone or a mobile device. You can click on the title of the table of contents, title of the subject you want to go to. And if that's on page 580, it'll take you there just like that. You'll be on page 580. So you can navigate back and forth. And then basically I've taken some of the conclusions and the summaries and so forth from these studies with specific quotes from the studies. And then I also put the link to the study on PubMed or the source journal. So people they want to check it out and see if what I'm saying in there is true. It's a click away. And then they can read the whole study and they can look at it. But literally, this work, it's more the work of thousands of scientists than myself, thousands of scientists. And I reviewed the major journals in here, and the journals represent 45 different medical and scientific disciplines, including like the most prestigious journals in the world, like the Journal of the American Medical Association, the New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet, British Medical Journal, the journal Vaccine. I could go on and on and on. So when people say, you're a chiropractor, you shouldn't be giving people advice on vaccines, I tell them is I see myself as a journalist. And really what I'm doing is it's not my advice. These are people a whole lot smarter than me in the areas of research and science, people who their life's work is doing this, putting together these meticulously done studies, and then I'm just basically sharing the information.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so like when you started like searching, was there certain keywords that you looked for at the beginning, like vaccines that are harmful, or is there certain vaccines that you're out after, or how did it all start?
Yeah, let me share with you something I've learned since I started this project, and it would be very difficult to do this project today, and I'll tell you why. Because back in the day when I started this about 4.5 years ago, Google and the search engines and everything, when you put in adverse events for vaccines or vaccine adverse reactions or something in the search engine, you would come up with a lot of studies that really discuss the adverse reactions in vaccines, and a lot of websites where people have accumulated a lot of information on the side effects and the lack of effectiveness of vaccines. It was like cherry picking at the time. I could really find a lot of information there. And then of course you can go to PubMed and put in keywords and you can find things that way, which I did and do. But what has happened now, and many of your viewers are aware of this social media censorship, but what has happened is search engines like Google and so forth, and anything associated with Microsoft, they have changed their algorithms. So anything you put in about vaccines or vaccine negative connotations in any way, they bring you right back to all of the medical websites, the CDC websites, the Medscape, all the medically oriented websites. It is extremely difficult to even find anything by using search engines anymore. And
I totally agree with you. I was, I hate this mask thing. And like when the virus just started, you could find a lot of stuff like about particle size of the different viruses and different things like that in articles. But now you can only find the updated stuff like from 2019, 2020. Like it is censored, and it's just crazy.
Well, it is, and you can still access these studies. In fact, one just came out a week ago that you might be interested in, Doc. In the Annals of Internal Medicine, it was a Danish study in Denmark, and they took 3,000, just over 3,000 people, and they had half of them mask up, and they followed them, and then the other half didn't wear masks. And at the end of the day, they found out that the difference in the people that contracted COVID-19 in the masked group versus the unmasked group wasn't even statistically significant.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the latest one that just proves, to your point, viruses are about 100 times smaller than bacteria. And bacteria are so small, you obviously can't see them with the naked eye. And even some microscopes, you have to really dial in to see a bacteria. Mm-hmm. But viruses are 100 times smaller. So the analogy I love, which kind of is it's not a scientific analogy by any means for your viewers, but it's kind of like using a chain link fence to keep out a mosquito. That's what these cloth masks are like with viruses. And so we're seeing, even despite all the mask mandates everywhere, what are we seeing in cases right now? We're seeing cases go through the roof, even though you can't go in a public place without a mask on. They really don't work. And this is the thing that is just...
They don't work at all.
Yeah, this is the thing that is so crazy about this issue, is that back in February and March, our health officials like Anthony Fauci, the director of the CDC, and our Surgeon General are on tape saying that public masking doesn't work. I mean, Dr. Fauci said something to the effect that it might stop a little droplet. He was essentially kind of mocking the idea of people wearing masks in public. It might stop a little droplet, but it's not going to stop the virus. Then all of a sudden, they just flipped a 180 degrees. And overnight, the science hadn't changed. And just for your viewers, on my website, I've got an article about face masks, and I have 70 studies and position papers by country and World Health Organizations, not just the World Health Organization, but other types of organizations and medical journals and things, 70 different ones that came prior that all said the same thing, that masks will not make a difference with transmission of these kinds of influenza-like viruses.
Your website is wellnessdoc.com, right?
Yes, sir.
Wellnessdoc.com.
Wellnessdoc, DOC. Yep.
Wellnessdoc.com. Because in the beginning, what was it? The World Health Organization, they were flip-flopping all over the place and saying like Corona wasn't, it couldn't spread, it wasn't viral enough, and all kinds of different things. And now it's really, as a medical doctor, I'm not a medical doctor, but as a practitioner in the medical field, it's been really disheartening how, the world has reacted to this, and the United States, and there's nothing that we ever were taught is happening. They're not sticking to the science, and people are believing it.
Well, and more and more studies are coming out about the lockdowns and really showing that the lockdowns themselves aren't working. The lockdowns are creating tremendous collateral damage, not only with our economy, but the loss of so many small businesses, restaurants, different things that people have put their lifeblood into, and all of their finances are being completely crushed. The suicide rates, especially in younger people, are going through the roof. Depression, anxiety, domestic abuse and child abuse, and other kinds of deaths are accounting for what they call deaths of despair. And economists look at these kinds of things as of life years lost. And Del Bigtree on the Highwire, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, Del Bigtree was an award-winning producer for CBS, and the show he produced for many years or few years, like I think it was maybe 9 years, was called The Doctors, and he won an Emmy Award.
Oh yeah.
And he does a show called The Highwire every Thursday. You can go to thehighwire.com or look for The Highwire with Del Bigtree on Facebook. This is an amazing resource for your viewers to be able to plug in and really see the stories behind the stories that the mainstream media does not want you to hear, the stories that really cut through and demolish the narrative of the fear and so forth surrounding COVID. Now, I don't want to be taken out of context though, Doc, and I don't want people to think that I'm saying COVID is not dangerous for some people. It really is. And in fact, I just wrote an article that I'm hoping will be published on Children's Health Defense, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s organization. And a couple of statistics, if I could share with your viewers, is that okay?
That's why you're here.
Well, I think what I really wanted to do with this is I'm seeing people in my age group and younger who have this tremendous amount of fear surrounding COVID, and the fear of putting kids in school and the fear of, young people playing sports and all this is completely irrational. And when we look at the statistics from the CDC, and I've got these pulled up here so I could be accurate about them. So think about some of these numbers. People under 45 years of age account for only 2.5% of all COVID deaths. People under 55 account for only 7.3%. People under 65 account for 19.27. So as you can see, as the age group goes up, it increases. People 65 and over account for 80.73%. So the survivability rate, in other words, what is your risk of dying from COVID? If you're between the ages of 1 and 19, your survival rate is 99.997. That's better than the flu, way better than the flu for that age group.
Yes.
There have been 3 to 4 times more people die in that age group in children from the flu this year than from COVID. From ages 20 to 29, it's 99.98 survival rate. And even in the group 50 to 69, it's 99.5%. So, if you put things into perspective, it's crazy to think that people in those age groups are so fearful. Now, there's a caveat to that, of course. People that have comorbidities, people that have chronic disease or metabolic diseases like diabetes and hypertension and kidney disease and have obesity, those people are at greater risk. Their immune system do not function in the same way that people who are healthy do. So even if you're in a younger age group and you have comorbidities like that, it does increase your risk of death. But bear in mind, the numbers I just gave you are across the board, even including people with comorbidities. So if you're in those age groups and you have no comorbidities or very few, your survival rate is going to be even way better than the general survival rate that I just cited. So it pays to live a healthy chiropractic lifestyle, right, Dan? Right, Doc? It pays to be adjusted, to eat healthy, to exercise. It pays dividends at times like this.
Yes. That's the thing nobody's talking about. When they talk about health, they're talking about putting a mask on and like staying away from everybody. Like that's not health. Like health is exercising. Health is eating correctly. Health is getting 8 hours of sleep. Health is getting out in the sunlight, being outside and being around people, like, loving, like
human touch.
Spiritually, touch. Spiritually, mentally, physically, and that's not happening. Like our older populations are basically in jails now. Like my grandma is 93 and people have to talk to them through the windows, and I just feel so horrible for that group of people. It must I just can't imagine. And a lot of them don't even know what's going on outside. And it's just,
It really is tragic, and you know, this hopelessness that can set in, especially, you know, well, in anybody that loses their business due to this, that's out of a job due to this, and elderly people that cannot experience the love of their family members anymore. It's terrible. And literally, what we've done with these lockdowns is, instead of dealing with the virus and allowing the people who can get it safely to get it and develop immunity and continue to keep our economy going, and then shelter or quarantine the people like your grandmother and people with high risk comorbidities. We knew about these risks way back in March. We knew who was at risk. So it's not a new revelation. We knew. And there's one country in the world that they're the outlier, one country that has done things differently. And some of your viewers probably are aware of this, but it's Sweden. Sweden never locked down. They never closed their restaurants, bars, or gyms. They never closed any schools. They never required mask wearing of their citizens. And they did have a spike towards the early part of the pandemic. And their infectious disease expert, Anders Tegnell, who's kind of the architect of their plan, admits that they made some mistakes, like every other country, with long-term care facilities and nursing homes. They did not protect those individuals as well as they know they should have, and you know, they just didn't know how dangerous this was going to be for that population. So they saw some deaths back then, but since then, because they got a lot of their population exposed, their death rate has come down. They're seeing some spikes right now in Sweden, especially in areas where they didn't have them before. But their mortality rate is almost zero. You know, even though their case rates are going up fairly significantly, the mortality rate isn't. And in fact, that's happening in the US, but you would never know it watching the mainstream media. You know, if you watch the mainstream media, you would think, you know, it was Armageddon, right?
Oh my God, yes. It's like the plague or something like people, like if you study like the Spanish flu, that was a real pandemic. Like this is a bad cold.
Well, and you know, and we can get into a whole discussion on that too. You know, around the turn of the last century, you know, when the Spanish flu, 1918, that time frame, people lived, the big cities were very overcrowded. They were filthy, dirty. They didn't have clean water supplies, you know, treated water. They didn't have sewage disposal systems. They didn't have, you know, public health measures and things like that. People didn't have good nutrition for the most part, unless you lived out on a farm and grew your own food. And so about the time there of World War I, and we had all these soldiers coming back, our nation there was a lot of people living in poverty and without the good nutrition. And when the soldiers came back, they were so depleted also, and bringing the infection back with them, that there's a lot that played into why that pandemic was so severe in that way. But if any of your listeners are aware of Dr. Scott Atlas, he's one of the coronavirus task force members that President Trump appointed in July. He's a Stanford doctor, and he has been, I would say, the one voice of reason and common sense. If anyone wants to follow him on Twitter, it's I'm not sure of his Twitter handle, but his name is Scott Atlas, Dr. Scott Atlas. He put out a post 2 weeks ago. And basically it showed the US cases over the course of the pandemic, the spikes, the one back in April, early May, the one back in the summer, especially with the southern states that didn't get hit with the first peak, and then the spike now. And the graph also shows the deaths. So it shows the peak of the deaths in April, and then it shows throughout the summer where the deaths were and where they are now. And despite the fact that the media is hyping the cases, we have higher cases than we've ever had before. That's all you hear. The death rate, the needle has hardly moved on the death rate at all since the lowest points of the pandemic in cases. So we're seeing younger people are getting the infection. They're getting through it easily. Doctors are learning how to treat this better in hospitals. We understand more about the disease. So they're using things like steroids, you know, within, you know, a week or two, a couple weeks of the treatment of infection.
Not respirators, but what was it?
People getting intubated.
Intubated, yeah, they're blowing out their lungs.
Yeah. Ventilators, yeah, with the ventilators.
That's what I'm looking for.
We were, unfortunately, we didn't really understand the disease the way we do now. And what really kills people, Doc, they're finding what really kills people is an out of control immune system. So people with these comorbid diseases have a very dysregulated immune system. It doesn't just necessarily mean their immune system is suppressed, but it does mean that, they catch colds easier, they catch viruses easier. But their immune system doesn't regulate itself the way that it should. So there's a term many of your viewers have probably heard called a cytokine storm. Another one that they've identified in severity is called a bradykinin storm. But basically, this is where the immune system runs out of control and starts damaging healthy cells and tissues and damaging the body. So an interesting thing, and one thing that I've been preaching since the beginning, in fact, preached with my patients all these years, is proper vitamin D levels.
Yep.
They are finding that having the right vitamin D levels is tremendously protective against severe COVID and against death. There's a study coming out from somewhere in the world nearly every week about this, validating the previous studies. And so I always encourage people, go get your vitamin D levels tested, know what your number is. And your number ideally should be somewhere between 60 and 80, a minimum of 60 to 80. Obviously, you don't want to get too much. You don't want to be up in the hundreds or over 100. But if you're in that 60 to 80 range, you're going to be much more protected. And this is one of the reasons we're seeing people of color, people with pigmented skin, African Americans, Hispanics, are having higher rates of mortality and higher rates of deaths, significantly so, because in part of it is their vitamin D levels are much lower, and part of it is that those ethnic groups tend to suffer from more of those comorbid diseases and illnesses.
That is true. That is true. Yeah, where I'm from, North Dakota, the average, I think, vitamin D that percentage, the average amount of vitamin D that a person has is like around 30, because we're so far north and it's dark,
Well, and I'll bet a lot of people don't have 30 up there even, Doc. If you look at the normal, quote unquote, normal reference range, they consider like 30 or over sufficient. One of the reasons and one of the ways they develop reference ranges is by looking at the whole population, and then they pick a normal, quote unquote, an average for that population. But literally hundreds of scientific papers on vitamin D over the last many years have shown that that's not optimal to maintain ideal health, or certainly not to help to treat different kinds of health conditions.
Yeah, I'm bringing a nurse practitioner into my clinic, and we're going to do some vitamin D and vitamin C and zinc IV bags and things like that for people.
That's awesome.
To the gap between medicine and like alternative medicine, I guess. There's a huge gap there where nutrition is and optimizing health is.
And another thing that's frustrating, Doc, is all this information is on the NIH, National Institutes of Health website. I do a monthly newsletter. If someone's interested, they can go to my website and find the link there and subscribe to it. But I've been covering COVID-19 since the start of the probably since April. And I put every month, it's usually about a 30 to 50 page newsletter covering, again, a lot of the stories that people aren't hearing about, with more of the facts and the real data. But every month I put in a different nutrient and talk about that nutrient and its value with preventing infectious disease and boosting the immune system, and even studies related to that nutrient in COVID. And one of the nutrients you mentioned is zinc. That's a very good call on your part, Doc, because zinc is one of the things that when it can get inside the cell, it will interfere with the virus's ability to replicate or reproduce essentially inside the cell. And that's what destroys a cell and allows all those new viral particles to spread to other cells. So it has a difficult time getting into the cell, however. So zinc is a positively charged molecule. So to get into the cell more effectively, one of the drugs that's been used is hydroxychloroquine, especially early on, in the illness, is very effective because it acts as a zinc ionophore. And what that means is it helps the zinc get into the cell. It acts as like a transport mechanism, opens up the zinc channels. And then the other thing you could do if you can't get a prescription for that is you can use quercetin, which is a flavonoid. Quercetin is found in lots of fruits and vegetables, or EGCG. I can't pronounce the full name because it's like a 20-syllable word. EGCG is from green tea. And so those two also act as zinc ionophores. So what you're doing is awesome, Doc. You're providing the nutrients and the ability for the body to fight infection.
Yes, totally. And that's what we need to do is get healthy instead of, the American diet, and Americans are one of the least healthy countries in the United States just because of our nutrition. You were talking about how we had bad nutrition in 1918. I don't know. I would argue that maybe it's worse now if people are, because there's not as many nutrients in the food. Because
and they had. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Doc.
It's all the food, like the grains and meats, are full of antibiotics, and the grains are mutated. They're genetically altered, so you're not getting nutrients and the actual particles in grain and things like that are different. So the body sees them as invaders, and increases your autoimmune or your immune response, and that increases which most people's chronic issues stem from systemic inflammation.
Absolutely. You're so right. You're totally right. And that's one of the reasons why people who are already systemically inflamed, who get this virus, they are the ones that have a very difficult time with it because they're already on fire, so to speak, So when their immune system overreacts, it's like taking a 2-alarm fire and blowing it up to a 4-alarm fire, right? And so they don't have as much margin, so to speak, of error when they do get sick. But to your point, and this is the research that I did for this latest article about, trying to help alleviate people's fears or help them understand their true risk. I found that statistically 60% of Americans have one or more chronic disease, and 40% have 2 or more. So for instance, with high blood pressure, 45% of Americans have high blood pressure, and obesity, 42% of Americans have obesity. Diabetes, 16% of adults have diabetes, and 42% have pre-diabetes. So if you do the math, that's darn near 60% of people that are diabetic or borderline diabetic. So to your point, the countries that are getting hit the hardest, and we're going, why is the US getting hit so hard, with hospitalizations and things like that? And a huge part of it is that very thing that you brought attention to. The Asian countries, one of the reasons they're doing so much better is, in general, their population is much leaner. They walk a lot more, they ride their bicycles a lot more, they get more exercise than the average American, and their levels of these kinds of chronic diseases are way, way lower.
Yeah, if you decrease your carbohydrates and sugars, that's a huge factor in inflammation. And you probably know better than I do when the food pyramid came out. That's what caused so much diabetes and this systemic inflammation and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and all of these chronic inflammatory diseases. That's why we're so unhealthy, is because we followed that for so many years.
Yeah, and many years ago, when they were trying to figure out what caused heart disease, the sugar industry literally financed studies that were completely falsified, related to sugar. And they said that it was fat in the diet that caused cardiovascular disease, and cholesterol and fat became the boogeyman. That has since really been disputed and refuted, I would say. For the most part. Now, obviously, there's healthy and unhealthy fats. We could get into that,
Yeah.
trans fats and deep fried fats and all those things that will damage your arteries and so forth. So, but to your point, it's sugar. It's too much insulin, the insulin overdrive from too many carbohydrates and simple carbohydrates that cause or increase systemic inflammation in the body.
Yeah, that's what we really need to, that's what we can do to actually help ourselves instead of just hiding in place and getting more food delivered to us.
Yeah, unfortunately, so many of the measures that have been taken, I believe, are suppressing people's immune systems. Let's start with the fear, just the fear mongering. And, if there's one hospital that gets overrun in somewhere in Indiana, you can bet that's going to be all over the news. And it may not even be representative of the whole country. And yeah, we're spiking more, and some of that capacity is being used up now, but we still have lots of hospital capacity in most places, but you would never know it by watching the news. So, you got that, and then you got people walking around in masks all day. I am still amazed that I see people out walking by themselves or riding a bicycle or jogging or riding in their car by themselves wearing a mask. I just want to say, please understand that that's detrimental to your health, and you're really not at risk out here to get the virus. You should really take your mask off when you're outside and you're not around other people. But, they've created such a environment of fear that it's hurting people big time, and being inside and afraid to go outside, and, having the economic losses and everything that are causing so much devastation. It's all immunosuppressive. Yeah. So if we see a wave of people getting sick now and ending up in hospitals and maybe more people dying, I'm going to argue that a good percentage of that has been caused by the lockdowns and the draconian measures that we've taken over this virus.
And I would agree with you. And the other thing is, we have a big health system here. It's called Stanford Health. I don't know if you've ever heard of it or not, but they're letting nurses with COVID work in the hospitals, and it's just it blows my mind.
Wow.
Yeah, because there's not enough nurses and doctors, because those baby boomers are retiring, so there's not enough nurses and doctors, and so they'll let doctors, I've heard, that are emergency room docs, come and work in the ER if they wear an N95 mask, which is not going to do anything. And the governor even announced that they were doing this, and then I was all against it. I was just fighting against, and I have been fighting the whole time, and people it just amazes me, what people believe, just because the media will say one thing or a leader will say another thing, and our leaders are just, they're fanning the flames, and it's just it's quite insane. It really is, it seems like.
Well, and I believe when it comes to politicians, I believe that they will do anything to save their skin, to keep their jobs, to get reelected. And so everybody, from a politician standpoint, I believe a big part of this is driven because no politicians are going to want to make a mistake. So what they think they're doing is erring on the side of caution by taking this direction. We're going to lock everybody down, try to keep the viral levels down. Well, they're only suppressing them a little bit by the lockdowns. They're going to come back, as we see when states start opening up, they start coming back again. And but they think they're doing the right thing in many cases, because they think that's rational. But when you think about a virus and an epidemic, the virus doesn't go away because there are still some people with it. So when you open back up and you expose people to it, more people are going to get it. And so it is really it comes from a place of flawed thinking. And then also, everybody not wanting to make a mistake, trying to cover their backside.
Yeah, and it's sad, and and the leaders are getting tired too. I think they're making mistakes, and it's quite mind-blowing to see how this is all panning out. Let's let's talk about the vaccine. What do you know about that? What have you heard about the coronavirus vaccine?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert. I'll be the first to admit that. I'll say that right off the bat, but I do know a few things that I've learned through my research and the different people I follow and the different posts and podcasts and different things I follow and looking at some of the studies. So, the vaccines, it's interesting because we're seeing a flurry of PR. It's a PR campaign right now. Moderna's vaccine is greater than 90% effective, and Pfizer BioNTech's, that one is, I got this here because I wanted to make sure I was correct. The Moderna vaccine is 94.5% effective. The Pfizer BioNTech, they say, is greater than 90% effective. But effective at doing what is really the question. And, what is the end point? What is the goal? Are they effective at reducing mortality or death? Are they effective at reducing hospitalizations? Are they effective at reducing transmission? And as it turns out, and even Anthony Fauci said something about this a couple months ago, he said that these vaccines at best are going to reduce the symptoms a little bit, and especially in people with mild disease. So if they don't reduce transmission, okay, that means somebody infecting somebody else. If it doesn't prevent that, if it doesn't prevent hospitalizations and it doesn't prevent deaths, what are we doing? I mean, what is the point, right? What is the point? And so there's a lot of monkey business that's going on with the safety studies and the vaccines. And again, I'm not trying to give a commercial here, but Del Bigtree's nonprofit is called ICAN, the Informed Consent Action Network. They have been suing the CDC and the FDA and the different government agencies, HHS, to using Freedom of Information Act requests. And when they don't get their information that they're requesting, that they should with the Freedom of Information Act request, they sue these agencies and they get the information. So they have been on top of so much of this stuff. And, they are really trying to hold these government officials and people, their feet to the fire, because that's one of the points that they're making in their most recent petition that they did with the FDA, is to demand the valid endpoints for determining if a COVID-19 vaccine is effective or not. Is it just going to reduce symptoms slightly, or what are the valid endpoints? We want them to really cough up that information, which they're being very sketchy about. So we know right now that these mRNA vaccines, which have never, ever been, an mRNA technology has never been used in a vaccine before. So I want your viewers to just think about that for a minute. People have been tested for a couple months now with this vaccine, despite what the adverse reaction or the adverse rate was. And by the way, in the phase 1 clinical trials with Moderna, 100% of people with their first 100 microgram dose got a side effect, 100%. And after the second dose, it was also 100%, but 21.4% of those people had a severe adverse reaction. So, and that was early on. But if you watch the reports very closely, they already have millions of these doses coming off the production lines. In other words, they have not even gotten FDA approval, emergency use approval yet, and they're already producing it when the studies have only been going on for a couple months or so, the human trials, the larger scale studies. What is going to happen 6 months down the road for these people, or a year down the road? Autoimmune disease, which is one of the most possible risks of these vaccines, autoimmune disease doesn't show up sometimes for up to 3 years. Really? And this is the reason why your typical vaccine takes 4 to 6 years to develop. And even in some of those, and we could get into that whole thing with children's vaccines, sometimes they're only tested for days, like the hepatitis B vaccine for 5 days, the safety study for 5 days, sometimes for a couple of weeks. Oh. But in general, vaccines, the whole process takes 4 to 6 years. So rushing this thing to market and not knowing what's going to happen to people, especially people that they want to give this to the most, and that's the highest risk people, the elderly and the people with comorbidities. Their immune systems don't respond to things like the average healthy person. how is their immune system going to respond to this, and what's going to happen within 6 months or a year or 2 years? It is literally going to be the largest human experiment ever on the face of the earth. And
Yep.
I don't know about you, Doc, but personally, I don't want to be part of an experiment like that where they have no idea what's going to happen with it down the road.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people want to be a part of it, but I think it's going to be forced upon us. If you want to fly, if you want to do, travel from state to state, depending on the governors and whatnot, I think it's going to be forced upon us in a way that we won't be able to fight against it. If not enough people stand up and speak out, it's really scary.
I would encourage your viewers and all the chiropractors out there, to really, really get on board with trying to share as much information as possible and help to educate other people, because with the social media censorship of all of these topics now and everything, they've intentionally tried to make it very difficult to share information. The only way we're going to be able to do it is through grassroots effort and everybody pitching in to share information with other people. And as far as the mandates and so forth, one of the things that I see coming, and I've really seen this coming from day one, the whole vaccine thing. As I said, our government agencies are so embedded with the pharmaceutical industry. In fact, one of ICANN's petitions was to get information on who stands to gain royalties from these vaccines. And the Moderna vaccine, which is Anthony Fauci's, horse in the race, the National Institutes of Health, their horse in the race, and the one they've been pushing since early on. There are several officials with the National Institutes of Health that stand to make millions of dollars in royalties because they have their names on patents that are going into this vaccine. That is the kind of stuff that goes on. They've got it all documented, and they've actually disclosed who these individuals are, and they're going to make payments of up to $150,000 a year for them and their families, even if they pass on. So over the course of time, they'll make millions of dollars. Doesn't that reek of conflicts of interest to any of you out there? I mean, when those kinds of things are going on, it really makes me leery of anything that we hear. And the CDC, a lot of people don't know this, but they hold 54 patents on vaccines. The CDC is a vaccine company. They hold 54 patents on vaccines and vaccine-related products. And a lot of people are surprised to hear that. Like they'd be surprised to hear that Google is in the vaccine business. They have given hundreds of millions of dollars into vaccine companies they've invested and so forth too. Now, again, I haven't verified that, but the source on that was Robert F. Kennedy Jr. with Children's Health Defense many months ago, maybe a year or two ago, that Google, and probably about the time they started changing their search engine algorithms, so you couldn't find anything negative about vaccines. But
yeah,
talk about the swamp, right?
Get PubMed or to the National Institutes of Health and actually look up the studies like you do to find the negative. You have to really dig, and you got to know how.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the reasons I created my project, Doc, is as a resource tool, as a reference tool for people, because especially now that it's very difficult to get some of this information. People can go on there and they can search for whatever. It's also keyword and phrase searchable, so they can find every time autism is mentioned in there, every time MMR is mentioned, or whatever it is that they want to learn about is mentioned. They will, it'll take them to that point in the document. And so, in fact, one thing that I want to share with your viewers is that over the course of the last 2 years since I released that document, and I've updated it twice, I have given away over 100,000 of those ebooks. They've been downloaded and shared. And so I've just recently, just this week, started charging for it, and I'm charging $6.95. What I found over the last 4.5 years is this has kind of consumed my life, because I really feel it's critical to get this information out, especially in light of what's happened now. And so I spend so much time writing articles and doing all this that I really needed to start to charge something. And I wanted to make it very nominal so that, it wasn't something that it's like a Starbucks cup of coffee or something, for somebody to give up to have this 730 page, reference manual. So.
Yeah, you put a lot of time and effort into that, and thank you so much, because that's what caught my eye when I don't know where I first came across it, but 1,200 studies. I'm like, holy cow! Like, whoever
Yeah,
sat down to look through 1,200 studies.
and make no mistake, there's 1,400 now, and yeah, I could be going. The last 2 years, I could have been doing this 24/7. There probably be 6 or 7 or 8,000 studies in there. There's almost no end to it. When you read these studies, and they have 200 references in those studies to things that they discuss in there, you quickly realize that the numbers that are in that document are just the tip of the iceberg of what's out there.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it's really pretty amazing. Of course, people like myself who are trying to bring about awareness of vaccine risk are called anti-vaxxers. And, it's a name, it's a slang, it's a slur, it's a name that, and if you notice, this happens in the political discussion a lot. When people don't have a rational or an intellectual argument, or they can't win an intellectual argument, they start calling names. So because they can't win an intellectual argument about this, because there is so much science that refutes what they say, they start categorizing people by calling them names. And a lot of these people, I'm telling you, I've met them at events, I've met them at speaking engagements. They are mothers and fathers, and I've met the vaccine injured children, and I've heard their stories. And I mean, it breaks my heart. And that's one of the things that really drives me, because I've met dozens and dozens of these parents and children and heard their stories, and they are real, and their stories are real, but they're dismissed. These people are dismissed as crazy, or they don't know what they're talking about. They're literally made invisible. And I'm not going to put up with that. Their lives have become a living hell when, it takes $2 to $3 million on average, they say, to raise an autistic child in through adulthood. And the parents have to raise them until they become adults, until the day they die, or the day they have to be institutionalized when the parents die. This is something that the rates of autism are climbing astronomically, right in sync with the numbers of CDC doses of childhood vaccines. They've increased over the last 4 decades, right along with the increases of the vaccines and the childhood schedule, and the amount of aluminum and other things in those vaccines has escalated. So this is something I'm passionate about. It's become a labor of love, and so
definitely tell that.
Yeah, so I get jacked up just because, and again, a lot of it is, what I've seen and what I've heard and what I've experienced with these parents and their children.
So with kids and vaccines, what would you say are like the top 3 things that happen? Like, is it the schedule of so many vaccines together? Is it the mercury and the metals in the vaccines? Is it genetics of the children? Like, what have you found?
So the answers to your question are yes, 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 and yes. It's all of the above. Doc, I know when you were in school, I studied about the blood-brain barrier, and I'm sure you did too. The circulation, the blood supply to the brain has blood vessels that up until the age of 2 or 3, at least, they say, have these gap junctions. You can kind of think of it, it's more complex than this, but think about these holes between my fingers. They're porous. So those blood vessels allow things to seep into the brain, that as those blood vessels mature and those gap junctions close, it seals out most of that, not all of it, but most of it. So when we're giving by 18 months of age, we are literally giving over 5,280 micrograms of aluminum in shots to these babies. And they're getting 35 doses of vaccines by 18 months of age.
Really?
With other chemicals in there, including, and one of the crazy things is they have an ingredient called polysorbate 80 in some of these vaccines. Well, I did a deep dive on polysorbate 80, and what I found out is this is a chemical that they use to try to transport nanoparticles and other things into the brain in medical treatments for, say, Alzheimer's and other types of late stage diseases with the brain. So they're using these chemicals in these vaccines along with aluminum, dosing at high levels with these chemicals that help to transport these metals and these other nanoparticles like aluminum, or most of the mercury's really been taken out of the childhood vaccines unless they get a multi-dose vial flu shot. They need to get single dose vials if they're going to get the flu shot. But the flu shot in pregnancy has, again, the multi-dose has mercury in it, and polysorbate 80 and some other things. And then
everybody getting 10 times more flu shots because of the coronavirus.
And this is a whole nother thing that, again, maybe we can talk about sometime.
Rabbit hole.
But the flu shots, there's been not just studies recently, but over the past, that flu shots can increase risk of other respiratory viruses. And a study this past January 2020, was released in the journal Vaccine, which is, again, one of, if not the premier pro-vaccine journals, that the Department of Defense funded with our military back in 2017 and 2018 flu season, where they gave a half of the recruits the flu vaccine, the other half did not get vaccinated. And then they tracked what kinds of upper respiratory infections or viral infections they caught after either getting or not getting the vaccine. And they found that the group that got the flu shot had a 36% increase in developing coronavirus infections. Really? Coronaviruses make up part of the common cold, the spectrum of the common cold of all the different respiratory viruses that we call the common cold. The coronaviruses are about 15 to 20% of those common colds. So think about that. If we're giving flu shots to every elderly person, and if, as this study said, it increases risk of infection with coronavirus, what are we doing? I mean, recommending flu shots for every elderly person this year, particularly. And that was a study that was funded by, our government. Mm-hmm. It makes no sense.
Everything is backwards. Like, it's just
seems
it is that way.
Or upside down or something. Yeah, it's like Twilight Zone. I have to kind of pinch myself when I see what's going on, and then I read the studies and the data and things like, this makes no sense. What are we doing with the way we're doing this?
Yeah, this is like, we all grew up, took history class and learned about like the atrocities that happened in countries like Germany and World War II, and in different nations, and how just these little rights were taken away just little by little, and then people get scared, the economies get weak, and then these different people come to power who say they can help, and then before you know it, really bad things happen.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Germany, World War II, because most of your viewers have probably heard, I'm sure you have, of the Nuremberg trial where they tried Nazi war criminals. And after that trial, they created what's called the Nuremberg Code. And basically all the countries involved got together and said, because of the experimentation that went on with the Jews by the Nazis and the war criminals, the things that they did experimenting on these humans without their consent. And so the Nuremberg Code strictly prohibits human experimentation without informed consent and the person consenting to it. So when you were talking earlier about the mandates, this is going to be one of the biggest pushbacks or arguments that people will have, legitimate arguments. You cannot force a vaccine on people that has been rushed to market, does not have long-term safety trials. Literally, we are waiting to see what happens in the population from this vaccine after it's given to millions of people, and what happens over the next 2-3 years. The Nuremberg Code is against that, calls against that. So that is a legitimate argument for why a person would not want to participate in something like this. That is being, to be forced on people.
Is there a specific, have you studied the Nuremberg Code? Is there like a specific website or different books, things like that the viewers could listen to or go to look it up?
There is, I have a whole section on that in my ebook about informed consent, and in any type of medical procedure, chiropractic included. Before you adjust somebody, you have to explain to them the potential risks, even though they're minimal, even if 1 in a million, you have to tell them that there is this potential for risk. And so every medical procedure requires that, except vaccines. And it's interesting. Doctors are supposed to show this short little paper that doesn't go into any detail about risks and so forth, but 9 times out of 10, they don't. Most people, they've never seen anything when they've taken their children in. So it's interesting that vaccination seems to be the only medical procedure that they don't require informed consent. The patients don't have to see all of the potential risks of vaccines, because literally, if you read the package inserts for the vaccines, and they're all available online, you can get them as a PDF, and you look at the different adverse reactions of vaccines. If they told people like that, they would refuse it. And that's why they don't do it, because they want as close to 100% compliance as possible. So I do have a section on that, but also I'm sure if you just use a search engine and went online and looked up the Nuremberg Code, you would get a lot of information about that.
Okay. Here's a question for you. So when you were, let's say when you were 18 or when you were growing up, how many vaccines were there?
This is going to date me.
But
believe there was
information, because like our young people have no idea, like they just are told to take a vaccine, and they've always taken a vaccine. And so they think it's okay. And they don't understand that they don't know the history.
Yeah, when I was a kid, there was, I believe it was 4 vaccines, and I got 2 doses of each. So I think I had 8 doses. Currently by age 18, if a child follows the CDC schedule, they'll have 72 doses. So it's gone from 8 to 72. And if you take into consideration the DTaP vaccine and the flu vaccine, the DTaP is 3 vaccines in one: diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, given to pregnant women. And the flu vaccine, that's another 4 doses that fetus has had, that baby in utero. So, now that takes us up to 76 doses, because those components, they do pass through the placental barrier. That's been proven in many studies. So it's kind of circling back to, is it too many? Is it too early? Do some kids have genetic predispositions? Yes, they do. And we have the ability to test infants and children for this. Why we're not doing it, I have no idea. This is why there needs to be a commission or something set up that looks into vaccine risk awareness, vaccine risks, and so forth, because we need an independent commission, which is hard to find, somebody that isn't bought and paid for by pharma. But we need an independent commission that can actually, look at the deficiencies and where we're missing the mark. And at least, if we don't do away from the whole paradigm, which, as you know, Doc, probably 95% of all chiropractors have never vaccinated any of their children. And they are the healthiest kids, least doctor's visits. There have been some comparison studies on vaccinated versus unvaccinated children. They are the healthiest kids because, well, they get adjusted, they have a healthy lifestyle for a couple things, but also, they've never been vaccinated. And so, we need to be able to test for methylation defects, other things where the baby or the child's body is not able to detoxify and eliminate these metals and these chemicals the way that most children can.
Yeah, and when they can't eliminate the chemicals, then it affects their DNA, which is what causes the autism or the Epstein-Barr, the different neurological symptoms that may happen, correct?
Yes, yeah, and that's a big part of it. And the other thing is that when these aluminum nanoparticles go to the brain, they cause an upregulation of the brain's immune system, which are the glial cells, GLIAL, the glial cells. The brain's immune system causes an increased inflammation. Remember, we were talking about the cytokine storm with COVID? It's kind of like a mini cytokine storm in the brain because it upregulates inflammation through the brain's immune system. And that's one of the things that can cause this brain damage and so forth with some children.
They're talking about now with people that no one's ever thought of it before, but like they say people that have had COVID, they have brain fog. Like it's a new thing.
Yeah.
That can be treated.
Yeah.
Inflammation your brain. You know, like you said, the glial cells are causing inflammation.
Yes.
So it all goes back to nutrition and physiology, and medicine is getting away from it, and it's
well, and and I'll make this point. I hope we're not running over, but I just want to make a point that kind of circles everything back to what you're just discussing too. One of the things that most people don't realize is the pharmaceutical industry has co-opted the reason the deaths from infectious diseases went down through the 20th century. So from the year 1900 until mid to late 20th century, infectious rates of deaths from infectious diseases, all the infectious diseases just went down at a pretty steady clip. And let's use the measles vaccine, for example. And this is all government data, I have it all in my ebook, it's government sources. If you look at the decline of mortality or death due to measles, it had declined 99.4% before the vaccine was even introduced. But when you listen to people, you listen to the media and pharma hype their measles vaccine, they keep saying, well, we would have, thousands of kids dying or millions dying if we didn't have this measles vaccine. It's a lie. And here's what I'll guarantee will happen with the COVID vaccine. As this virus runs its course, as a certain percentage of the population become immune, the virus will burn out because it's not going to have enough hosts that haven't had the disease to keep it going. So as we introduce this vaccine now, and as the virus coincidentally and concomitantly, whatever the word is, burns out at the same time, we start giving millions of doses to people, they are going to take credit for the decreased mortality from COVID. But trust me when I say this, and it's not me, I'm not an immunologist, I'm not an epidemiologist, but I have listened to dozens of them and read the papers and everything. This is what happens with every respiratory infectious disease. It's cyclical. And so between the antibody levels produced in people that have had it, between the T cell immunity from people that have had other coronavirus colds, common colds and so forth, between those two, we only got to get probably to 50 or 60% of the population before this is going to start to burn itself out. But unfortunately, the timing on that is probably going to coincide with when all these people are getting vaccines, and guess who's going to take the credit?
Yeah, the drug companies. But the thing is, and I'll make this prediction right now, is like you're exactly correct. You said it's cyclical. So people think that the coronavirus vaccine is going to come out, and then all the numbers are going to go down. Yes, that will happen because it's going to be spring by the time we really get all of that underway logistically. But it's not going to just go away like people think. If you study all of the other pandemics or virology or epidemiology, like you said, it's cyclical. So this is going to be around forever, or at least it's going to be a serious virus for the next, who knows how long. It could be 5 years, could be 10 years. Could be
well,
50.
as long as you have people that are still susceptible, that haven't had the infection, that's another thing about the vaccines. Typically vaccine immunity wanes. It wanes or it fades after time. Even natural infection antibodies levels fade some, the active antibodies, but there are dormant B cells, they're called B cells, that basically have been trained to fight the virus. They go dormant, and basically every time they're exposed to the virus, there's enough antibodies to prevent the person from getting it, and T cell activity. But it causes a little bit of activity with these dormant beta cells or B cells. So when they are exposed to a larger viral load, these will kick back in and be even more efficient at producing antibodies. So there's indications that the protection from this, the immunity from this infection might last for many years. One of the studies that came out, I believe it was in March, they took blood samples from people who had the SARS-CoV-1 infection in 2002 and 2003. So this is SARS-CoV-2. So SARS-CoV-1 was very similar. And they tested them against the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and they found that 100% of these subjects, I think it was a small study, and there's 23 or 20 some subjects, they all had a good measure of T cell immunity to this new quote unquote novel virus, but it's because they've been introduced to another virus in the same family many years ago. So my hope is that the virus will not be around forever. It won't. They say it's not probably going to be like a flu virus that shape shifts and morphs and changes so much year to year. And I'm hoping that's the case. But regardless, I don't think we're going to be able to vaccinate our way out of this. I think it's going to have to be population immunity, and if the vaccine helps that a little bit, great. But again, you have to ask at what cost. What is your risk versus reward? I'm not telling any of your listeners not to take the vaccine. I'm saying measure your risk versus your reward and decide what you think is in your best interest.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Palmer.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You can pick up his ebook at wellnessdoc.com. Only $6.95. Just a cup of coffee. I thank you so much.
Actually, if I might interject, Doc, if they go to www.1200studies.com, that'll take them directly to that page, so they don't have to try to find it on my website. So 1200 studies, plural, 1200studies.com, and that'll take them there directly. So sorry to interrupt.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Palmer. So that's 1200 studies, 1200studies.com. Pick up Truth Will Prevail and sign up for Dr. Palmer's newsletter, monthly newsletter, and you'll get a wealth of information on vaccines and the coronavirus and different things that are going on. You'll get the truth. And turn off your TV.
Yes. Right on. Thank you, Doc. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Palmer.
Take care, everybody.
Take care. Yes.
Bye.
Let's see. And we'll stop. Oops, stop recording. Good. Okay. Are you there? Oh, you went off. Hey, everybody on YouTube.